Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. I've got the co-captain's chair today. His first time ever on the Sea of Tranquility YouTube channel, but he's been a writer for the webzine for, John, 10 years, 12 years?
Yeah, at least that. Yeah,
At least that. So John Neudorf from Canada, all right?
Hello,
If you've been on the webzine, you've seen his stuff for many, many years. He has been one of my right-hand men as far as writing reviews for the website for so long. And when I asked him if he wanted to, pleasure's all mine. You've helped out so much, and you've helped out so many of the bands, and one of our definite workhorses on the website. So, and when I asked John if he was ready to come on the YouTube channel, he said, certainly. What do you want to tackle first? And I'm like, how about the Moody Blues? Because everybody's asking for the Moody Blues. So we were both kind of up for the challenge, and it's taken us a few weeks. I think I've needed a few weeks to kind of go through these albums again. John said the same thing. So what we've decided to do, because it's a large catalog, we've decided to pick our 10 favorite Moody Blues albums and rank them in our order of preference. So we're going to start with number 10, work our way to number 1. And I'm going to have John start us off. So before we begin, John, so we were chatting a little bit before we started recording about kind of our history with the Moody Blues. And myself personally, it's a band that I've listened to on and off for an eternity. But I admittedly don't listen to a lot. So I've had to reacquaint myself. How about you?
Same thing. As I was saying earlier, I first heard Octave in '78, and I bought the album. And as I said before, I'd listen to a band, whatever, and you kind of explore their back catalog after, an album or two or whatever. And I liked that album. And as we said, it's not, one of their higher ranking albums, but I enjoyed it. Never heard any, I've heard obviously Nights in White Satin and Tuesday Afternoon and some of those songs, but never the full albums. And then it took me into the 90s actually before I started, I should probably, explore this band more, and then Long Distance Voyager. I heard that when it came out, but again, I didn't go back into the older albums, and there are some really great albums there, and it's kind of my kind of music actually. I kind of like that atmospheric, a lot of pastoral, very lush symphonic stuff, and I think the Moody Blues really satisfies in that regard. So.
Yeah, and they've got that classic. Was it the classic 7? I think they call it, right? Is that what it is? It's classic 7. And like you, it actually took me a while to start buying the Moody Blues albums, because I had like a 2 CD greatest hits set for like a long time. And, for a while I was like, yeah, that's probably all I need, because it's got all their mandatory tracks, and they have a lot of really good tracks. And I said, you know what, though? I think it's time to go a little deeper and go and buy the albums so I can hear like all, the rest of the material. And it's for me, it's like, the Moody's are not what I listen to on a regular basis. Like, they're very, like you mentioned, pastoral, lush, mellow. The early stuff, there's a lot of that kind of psychedelia thing going on. There's some folk going on. They have the symphonic rock thing. They were never really a heavy band or anything like that. And I can see why a lot of people call them one of the early prog rock acts, although I don't hear a lot of prog on their albums, other than there's Mellotron galore all over the place, right? But I could totally see where they kind of fit. So I kind of always give them their due in that aspect. So, but a cool band. So you know how it goes, guys. We're going to start off with number 10. We're going to ping pong back and forth. So I'm going to have John start us off with his number 10 here.
Number 10. I don't have the album, but I've been listening to it on Spotify. And I think I did hear it back in the early 80s, and it is The Present from 1983. And of course, most notable because, Pinder had left earlier, a few years before that. And Patrick Moraz on keyboards. And of course, we all know what a great keyboardist he is. And I think it starts off really strong. I think it's my favorite song. Blue World is the first track. Some really nice keyboard work, some nice guitar work from Hayward. And then there's some good pop tunes. And I've always kind of considered the Moody Blues, as you said, Pete, not really prog so much, but more like an art rock kind of band for me. That's symphonic orchestral rock, kind of like ELO, a little bit like ELO in the 70s. And I love ELO, so maybe that's why I kind of really have gravitated towards their music. But Meet Me Halfway is a nice pop tune. Sitting at the Wheel again, it really has some Jeff Lynneisms in there. I like it. Another pop song. But and then they get a little bit. They kind of link some songs together on here. Hole in the World, kind of linked with Under My Feet, I think is not really progressive, but it's, you know, kind of adventurous. Has a little bit of that 70s feel, I thought. And the last two tunes from Thomas, I Am, more of a you know, mellower track, but then it kind of leads into Sorry, which again has that you know, that more of that 70s feel. So overall, you know, I think it's a strong album. And I was kind of really battling between this one and another album to, you know, for the number 10 spot, but that's it. Number 10, The Present.
I actually also was tossed between that album and the one I ultimately went with was The Other Side of Life from 1986.
Okay.
They're both, to me, they're from the same era. I think they were released, 2 years apart or something like that, 3 years apart. And they both are pretty successful for the band because they had like a little bit of a renaissance there in the 80s. And of course, you know, this was the third album with Mraz. This album was a platinum seller for them. I mean, it was a million seller here in the States. And, you know, Your Wildest Dream was a big hit. The Other Side of Life too, popular song, The Spirit, lots of bright, punchy synths, a little too much on the electronic drums for my money. But again, this was 86. That's what was going on right there. So probably the last big album for the Moody's, but definitely sold well. And like I said, you remember seeing them on MTV, you know, the video for Your Wildest Dreams was big. It was all over the radio. You couldn't escape this album. And I think I'm going to give this one the edge when it comes to the two that we just spoke about. So that's my number 10.
Okay, awesome. All right. I guess I'm next.
You're next, number 9.
Number 9. It is going to be Octave from 1978. As I said before, my first introduction into the band. And here's the album that I purchased all those years ago, and I never did replace it. I'm actually going to set up I'm going to get a turntable soon, I think. Really upset my wife, but I never did get the CD. But anyway, and the reason why I bought that album was Stepping in the Slide Zone. I just love that song. It was on the radio, and they were playing, you know, back in the day, they were like, even in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, they were actually playing some pretty decent, you know, they have some good radio shows on FM. They had a prog rock show, the one with Jerry Lucky. I don't know if you're familiar with his website, Exposure. And that kind of, I'm not sure if he played that song, but that kind of exposed me to some more, I'm not going to say this is a progressive album because it isn't, but more of that adventurous music. And, you know, I might have heard it on there first, and I just love that song. And of course, you know, it is loaded with ballads, and, you know, for better or worse, that's kind of what you get with the Moody Blues, right? And I'm kind of a sucker for, you know, a sappy ballad, and they, you know, are the kings of sapid balladry, I think. And I don't mean that as a slight to the band at all. I'll Be Level With You is super catchy, some fuzz guitar from Hayward. I like it. Another good ballad, Until We Meet Again. Under Moonshine is another really pretty track, kind of like a lazy Sunday morning. And of course, there's Driftwood, which is probably my second favorite track on the album. You know, one of the nicest ballads I think that Hayward's ever penned. So I know it doesn't get a lot of credit, but that will be my number 9 album.
Well, I'm going to match it number 9 with Octave.
There it is.
So, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's not a bad album. Is it one of their absolute best? No. But, and it's kind of mellow, which is fine because that's what they do. You know, they do that and they do it very well. It's the last one with Mike Pinder, so it's kind of like a noteworthy album for that. Stepping in the Slide Zone is a great song. That's a great hit single right there, and maybe not as big as some of their other ones, but I pretty much threw it at number 9 because of that song alone, because it's so strong. But yeah, there are some, you know, Under Moonshine, I think you mentioned, One Step Into the Light is really good as well. It's a fine album, I think. Like I said, top tier Moody's, probably not, but it's fairly strong. It's, if you haven't heard it, I would absolutely, you know, recommend it.
For sure.
Yep.
Okay, moving on. 1981, Long Distance Voyager, kind of a beat up case I have here. But, and again, I hadn't listened to this album in a while, but I listened to it when it came out for sure. And, you know, it of course, it's the first album with Mraz. So, you know, I think it's an important album for them. And of course, it has that 80s, you know, keyboard sounds are kind of 80s, but he's such a great player. And, you know, he's really, you know, a high point on this album, I feel. And not to take anything away from Pinder, because that's always been kind of a trademark for the Moody Blues is, you know, the keyboards, you know, the Mellotron, Chamberlain, whatever. It's been a really strong part of their sound. The voice, super catchy track. Gemini Dream, of course, you know, a big single for them. And this album, of course, it did, you know, pretty good in North America, so it was a notable album. Gemini Dream, I think I just mentioned Gemini Dream. Talking Out of Turn, I like how they combine, you know, the orchestra with Mraz. Hayward puts in another nice performance on guitar. One of my favorites, though, is Nervous. And it kind of reminds me of something maybe from Out of the Blue by ELO. I just think it, and that's kind of like my, you know, I dig ELO so much. 22,000 Days is another good one. Kind of an edgier, little bit darker tune on it.
That's a terrific song.
I like it. Yeah, from Thomas, I think. Excellent song. And I like it because, you know, it's a lot of the music is not so dark. Like, you know, it's kind of like that English twee type stuff. And it's kind of nice when they slipped in, you know, a little bit of a darker vibe on that one. So, yeah, and it kind of ends with a kind of a rocking song as far as the Moody Blues rock, that veteran cosmic rockers, some Eastern elements in there as well, a little bit of psychedelia, not like the early 70s, but they kind of, you know, maybe slip a bit of it in there. And I think it's a really solid album for an early 80s album. And I mean, you get what you get. It's that era, and I like 80s music. So I like it. Good album.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to match you again. Number 8, Long Distance Voyager from 81. And I toyed with putting this a little bit higher because I actually really enjoy this album now. And I really enjoyed it back then. You know, back in 81, I was not listening to a lot of music like this. I was listening to a lot heavier stuff, but I mean, Gemini Dream and The Voice are dynamite. Again, great radio tunes. And you mentioned before the shift from Pinder to Mraz, and, you know, Pinder's the guy with all the Mellotron, the more symphonic stuff, while Mraz, the flashy Moog and all that sort of thing. So night and day from the two keyboard players, completely different styles. And I just think that Mraz was the right guy for this band at the right time. And 22,000 Days, we mentioned, great song. Painted Smile is good. Nervous. I was listening to this again the other day. I'm like, that's as good as I remember it. And I was like, I could probably rank this a little bit higher, but that would almost be kind of sacrilege to rank it higher than the big 7, right? So, but I think, you know, number 8 is pretty strong on this list, but I like this a lot. This, to me, is a very, very listenable, upbeat Moody Blues album.
Cool. So far, we're kind of agreeing here.
So far, and yeah, we do not compare notes, guys. So for everybody watching, whenever I have a guest on the show and we're doing these kind of list programs, I always say, I don't want to see your list. I don't want to hear about it, because it's better when you all unveil it while we're together and see if we match anything or not. In most cases, we don't. But so far today, John and I are 2 for 3. So we'll see.
Okay, number 7, and this is kind of where it's getting tough for me, but it is Every Good Boy Deserves Favor. And so this was from 1971. You know, and again, it's kind of, I'm not sure if there's a concept here or not, but that's another thing that the band, you know, a lot of these albums are concept albums, like from their earlier, like from their big 7 album run. But it does have that AEG, AEGBDF mnemonic, you know, for the treble clef, and you're a guitar player, of course, you would know that. I think it starts off pretty cool with Precession. It's got that, you know, that spoken word stuff going on, a little bit of psychedelia. I like it. The Story in Your Eyes, pretty catchy tune. Emily's Song is a nice mellow track. What else we got here? Nice to Be Here Again. Has some fuzzier guitar on it from Hayward, and You Can Never Go Home, kind of near the end of the album. Again, some nice acoustic electric guitar. So overall, I like the album. Is it a classic? I don't think it would be a classic in my mind, but if I was to give it a rating on Sea of Tranquility, it would definitely be, a very, very good album for me.
Well, we're 3 in a row here.
Here we go.
We're 3 in a row here. The funny thing is I almost ranked this one higher.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think out of all those classic ones that we're going to be talking about here, this is probably, for me, the least successful of all of them. And you notice like every one of them has like that one monster track. And this one has The Story in Your Eyes, which is absolutely terrific. I think My Song is also pretty strong. Precession, you mentioned also. For me, this album, with the exception of the single, The Story in Your Eyes, I find this album very dreamy, and it's almost like it wants to get out of first gear, and it quite doesn't.
Right.
And again, a lot of the Moody's stuff is like that. So I can't really fault it too much. And I absolutely love the album cover. I mean, this is probably my favorite album cover from the band. It's wonderful. And it just, it exemplifies like everything about this band and the time period and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's still a very enjoyable album. It's very lush. It's very pastoral. It's got great melodies. I find like start to finish, it's not quite as strong as some of the ones that we're going to talk about coming up for me, but it's still fine. And it's part of their classic run for a reason. I just don't think it's quite as classic as some of the other ones we're going to get to.
Okay.
Are we going to do 4 in a row here? This will be interesting.
I don't know, but this, again, it was hard. Number 6 from 1968, In Search of the Lost Chord. And again, I love the album cover, and I forgot to mention, as you did, the last one, good cover, and that's kind of, a strong aspect for this band are the album covers. And for those of us who, like the physical product, which I know you do, look behind you there, and I do as well. And it's always nice when you get, some nice artwork. And that's what I remember in the 70s, open up those albums. Anyway, this one is very, very psychedelic, and I really like it. But if you don't like psychedelia and a lot of those Eastern accents, they throw in a lot of them. Like, I don't know if there's sitar on the album, but you certainly hear those sounds. So that's what you kind of get. I think the most popular song would probably be Ride My Seesaw. Kind of like, that late 60s psychedelic pop. It's a good song. I really like it. I think my favorite, though, would be Legend of the Mind. Really nice sweeping acoustic guitar. Just a beautiful song by them. Some nice flute from Thomas. House of Four Doors, parts 1 and 2 is also a good track. A couple of good songs. The Actor, I really like. It's kind of like a nice pop song. Moody Blues pop music. So it's a little bit, there's some proggy moments in there. Voices in the Sky, some great vocal harmonies in that one. And then, it ends with Om, and or I don't know if I said that right, but O-M, spelled like that, Om.
Yeah,
and that's where you really hear those Eastern, those Eastern elements. It's not my favorite on the album, but I think they ended it with probably their most, Eastern sounding track on the album. Very strong effort, and I think this is a classic. It's just, maybe slightly lower on my list, but it's a great album nonetheless.
There you go. Well, that ends our 3 in a row. So my number 6 is going to be Question of Balance from 1970. Another great album cover. Okay. I want to mention something you touched about when you were talking about In Search of the Lost Chord. I mean, vocally, these guys are spot on. It's great when you have a band like this who has a couple different singers, so you get all those different flavors. And again, this is another one of those albums. And I think everyone we're going to talk about going forward has that like one monster track, and then a lot of good supporting tracks. So here you've got Question, all right, which is a fantastic, fantastic song. Tortoise and the Hare is very, very cool. Again, you still have a little bit of the psychedelia from the late 60s in the music here. Minstrel Song is good. Dawning is the Day. Melancholy Man, of course, you got the balance, right? So kind of the great way to start the album, great way to end the album. I think it's very strong. And I could see lots of folks perhaps putting this a little bit higher, but and again, the lush nature of the music, Mellotron heaven on all these albums we're talking about here. So if you love that legendary sampler keyboard, right, you've come to the right place.
Okay, well, number five,
the top five.
Number five. Well, here it is. Question of Balance. You just talked about it. Yeah, I really like this album. And again, the cover is, excellent. So yeah, Question is, one of my all-time favorite Moody Blues songs. And I just love the acoustic guitar rhythms in that and how it kind of builds. It's one of those kind of shivers down my spine type songs. And you mentioned the balance as well. I like how they kind of, the song titles, Question, Balance, it's just kind of smart. And the balance is a gorgeous song. I love it. Melancholy Man is another really good tune. You mentioned Tortoise and the Hare. Minstrel Song, some great harmony vocals in it. Again, it's just the really, really nice melodies. You kind of get, good guitar work. And I kind of found that, like, I didn't realize how good a guitarist Justin Hayward is, but and maybe not. I'm not just in this album, but in listening to these classic 7 albums and even the ones after, he's really a good guitar player.
He is. You know what it is? He's not your prototypical guitar hero by any means, and I think I always kind of put him in the category of like a George Harrison, a guy who's great at rhythms, plays electric and acoustic probably even better, and just creates colors and tones and textures. And that's what he does. He's not a soloist. He's a guy that just plays the right notes and chords and things for the song. And there's something to be said about guys who can do that, and that's what they specialize in.
Sometimes less is more. And I agree. I love George Harrison's guitar playing. Not a flashy guy at all, but he knows, he's got a cool technique, kind of like Lindsey Buckingham from Fleetwood Mac. I just love his technique. He's probably more technically better than either of them, but it's not necessarily how many notes you can play, how fast you can play them. There's lots to be said about the space you leave between the notes and add those colors and textures and tones. He does it really well.
I agree. All right, so my number 5, I'm going to go to 1969's On the Threshold of a Dream. Another great album cover there. Another very, very strong album. This also still the psychedelic nature of the band hanging around, mixing with the pop and the little bits of prog, whatever. You got Are You Sitting Comfortably is a wonderful, wonderful song. On here you got The Dream, The Voyage, fantastic. In the Beginning, Lovely to See You, To Share Our Love. I mean, just probably, what's the word I'm trying to think of, when I was like kind of revisiting these albums the other day, this is the one that probably devoid of the huge hit, but this is just like a really lovely album. This is like very pleasing to the ears, lots of really lush melodies, and you got the vocal harmonies all over the place, plenty of acoustic guitar and mellotron, and just a really, really nice listen. It's like, this to me is not really a prog rock album. This is just, you mentioned art rock, symphonic rock, right? That's not complicated musical passages or anything like that. Not a lot of bombast, right? It's just very pleasing, lovely album, I think.
I agree. Which leads us to number 4, and it is Threshold of a Dream.
There you go.
Yeah, I totally agree, Pete. I think they still keep some of those psychedelic tones in here, not as much as Search of the Lost Chord. And but yeah, it's kind of lush, pastoral. I like the spoken word in the beginning, but the melodies on here, and as you said, there's no real like super big hit from this album. but every song is a good song. You know, a little bit of bluesy acoustic stuff in Dear Diary. As you mentioned, the Voyage is awesome. Have You Heard Parts 1 and 2? I like that. Are You Sitting Comfortably? Another excellent song. And lots of mellotron, of course. Lots of beautiful acoustic guitar, and the vocals are, you know, pure Moody Blues. They're so good. I just love this album. Number 4.
Yep, that's a good one. So when I was kind of putting this whole list together, I actually am very surprised by my next choice for number 4, because at first I was like, yeah, I don't know how high this is going to rank. Then I re-listened to it and I was like, yeah, you know what? This is even better than I remember, because it's been a while since I've listened to this. We're going to go with 1972's 7 Sojourn. This is a pretty terrific album. And, you know, I could have even ranked it a little bit higher. It's really, really strong. And again, not any huge, you know, it's got I'm Just a Singer in a Rock and Roll Band, which is a terrific song. And that is one of their more rockin' songs, right? And it's a dynamite early 70s psychedelic symphonic rock song, and they save it for the back end of the album. So it's like the first half of the first like 3/4 of the album, again, is very lush and kind of poetic and folky, and, you know, loads of pop. You and Me is terrific. Lost in a Lost World, When You're a Free Man. Then all of a sudden you get hit with the rock and roll band at the end. And it's just like, whoa, it's like, that's a little kind of breath of fresh air at the end of this very fine album, and it adds a little bit of variety to the album. And I think it's a great sounding album. I love the production on this album. Really, really good. I think probably the most underrated album in their entire 70s run, or classic run.
Okay, so number 3, and there it is. And I agree completely. I think this is a really underrated album. And, you know, doing a little bit of research for this show, you know, and it makes sense. You know, they start like the 67 Days of Future Past to 1972 to 7 Sojourn. I mean, that's 7 albums in 7 years. And apparently the band was getting a little burnt out, you know, with the touring as well. And, you know, an album a year, I could see that. And I think they just made a great album here. You know, Lost in a Lost World, I love that song. Folky, the Folky for My Lady is really good. Land of Make Believe is a beautiful song. When You're a Free Man, very orchestral and symphonic. And of course, and well, actually, Isn't Life Strange might be my favorite song in this one. I love that effect on the vocal. I think it's a great song. And of course, the, you know, Singer in a Rock and Roll Band, you know, the heavy, it's not a heavy song, but they kind of, it's a rocking song for the Moody Blues, and they kind of leave it at the end. And it's a great song. I mean, yeah. I think it is an underrated album, and I'm not sure why it is, but I love it. So, and it almost kind of went at number 2 actually, but it's a good song, good album, very good album.
And sold very well in your neck of the woods. I mean, it was a platinum seller up in Canada, gold here in the States. So I think this album is kind of where the platinum string broke here in the States, but up in Canada, still doing really big business.
Right.
So, all right, my number 3, I'm going to go to 69's To Our Children's Children, which is a very strong album, but man, for me, it's driven up by one song. My very favorite Moody Blues song of all time is Gypsy, and that's nestled right in the middle of this. And I like the rest of the album is very strong as well. Eyes of a Child 2 is great. Floating is awesome. Eyes of a Child Part 1. What else we got here? Sun is Still Shining. Watching and Waiting is good. But man, Gypsy, Eternity Road's another really strong one. But Gypsy is just such a fan. Now, for me, Gypsy is progressive rock. That's big and symphonic and exciting and dramatic. It's like, it doesn't get much better than that. I remember the first time I heard that song, I was like, I absolutely love this. I need to get that album, right? And it's like, or find out who that is. And I was like, oh, that's the Moody Blues, really? Because it's a little bit different for them. And, you know, again, early on, so this is still 1969. So you would think about that. Some of these songs are like that are coming out from this band, and you kind of look at everything else that's being released in 1969. Very different. So, but good album, and interesting album cover art. It's one of their more kind of, you look at this compared to some of the other ones we're showing here, and it's just like a little vague, but still pretty cool.
for sure.
Mellotron heaven on this album too. You know, I don't know which album do you think has the most Mellotron out of all these albums? Hard to say, right?
It is hard to say, and it might be the one you just mentioned.
I think so. Yeah, it's loaded all over it. So
it is. Yeah, I love it. I think we're at number 2.
Two, yeah.
For me, it is Days of Future Past, and this was a toss-up, and you know, I guess you could probably imagine which my number 1 will be, but you know, and you kind of mentioned, you know, as far as children's, you know, 1969. These guys, you know, when you kind of think about that, the music that was, you know, being put out, the Beatles were doing adventurous stuff, but I got there was a lot of bands that were doing adventurous stuff, but they kind of had a unique. I don't know of any other band that kind of had their sound, and combining, you know, the classical elements that they did. So, you know, maybe they are. There's certainly some progressiveness here, for sure. And this album, the combination, you know, the orchestra, the London Festival Orchestra with Mellotron is really, I think it's quite groundbreaking. And this could have easily been my number 1 album, and it could change next week. And I think, you know, it's just kind of a simple concept, you know, the goings on of a day, you know, for an ordinary person. But I think they really kind of nail it. Like, you know, the day begins, kind of gentle, kind of builds with the orchestra. And I like how they include some of the themes that you're going to hear on Nights Where I Sat, and the melody from that you hear. So there's some precursors that you hear in the first song that you're going to get, you know, further down the album. Dawn Is a Feeling is a beautiful song. Really nice flute on that one. The Morning, another kind of a very English song. I like it. It's kind of mellow. Lunch Break, it starts to kind of pick up quite a bit. And I guess that goes with the kind of the busy part of the day, right? And it gets a little bit, you know, rocking at times. And then, you know, the last 2 songs, I think that's why, or not the last 2 songs, but Tuesday Afternoon, it's always been, you know, one of my favorite Moody Blues songs. I'll never get tired of hearing it. And of course, Nights in White Satin, which, you know, it's a near perfect song for me. The vocals are outstanding. The melody, the lushness, the orchestrations. It is such a good song, and, you know, amazing, really. So I think could have been number 1, but this week it is number 2 on my list, Days of Future Past.
And it's also my number 2. And I think for a lot of people, it's going to be their number 1. And I couldn't argue that at all, because it took me a while to kind of figure this out. And it's like, all right, do I just automatically put it at number 1, or is it actually my favorite out of the top 2? And it came down to it. It really isn't. However, it's a spectacular album. It's beloved for a reason. And I think you hit on a couple key points here. So the concept of the album is very simple, and that's what works about it. Okay, because it's a concept that everybody can relate to. And I think there's a whimsical and kind of charming nature to this album that's very, very endearing. I mean, you listen to this album, it's like a feel-good album. It kind of touches your soul. And yeah, there's some, you know, very memorable songs on here, obviously, which you just mentioned, and they're all great. But I find that this is an album you got to listen to from start to finish. It's like, this is not, I tend to not want to hear a track or 2 from this. I want to play the whole thing. And I love the orchestra. And there's like this whimsical nature to the orchestra that adds this kind of like, just like, you know, I'm thinking like Peter and the Wolf or something like that, you know, the soundtrack type of stuff. And it's just a really, really like lovely, lovely album that is a classic for a reason. But I think there's an album in their canon that's a little bit better. So, and you obviously do as well.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I should have mentioned that. It is not an album that, you know, that I don't pick, and I don't typically pick songs from albums. I like to listen to, you know, the full album. And this like Days of Future Past is one of those albums that it kind of, every song kind of leads into the next, and it's just one of those albums that you need to listen to in one sitting for sure.
Yeah, and it's a timeless album. It's totally timeless.
timeless. Okay, number one, to our children's children, kind of like a tongue twister for me.
A lot of children there.
There are a lot of children, and as you mentioned, the album cover a little bit different for them, but it's still kind of, you know, it's kind of a neat painting. I mean, when you're looking at it in detail, tons of mellotron, of course, and you know, another concept. You know, I guess, you know, kind of, I didn't realize it before I kind of, you know, researched a little bit about, going to a new world, kind of a celebration of the Apollo 11 moon landing. But and of course, when you hear the first track, Higher and Higher, you know, that is, you know, you can imagine a rocket ship lifting off, into space. And that's kind of what, yeah, I think they do it really well. Eyes of a Child, beautiful song, parts 1 and 2. Never Thought I'd Live to Be 100, another really nice pastoral tune. And you mentioned Gypsy, it is a great song. I Never Thought I'd Live to Be a Million, another really nice tune. Candle of Life, Watching and Waiting, kind of a dreamy and pastoral, typical, kind of a classic Moody Blues, sounding track. Lot of excellent acoustic guitar throughout the album. The melodies are gorgeous. And this is for sure a 5-star album for me. No question about it, as is Days of Future Past, for sure.
So I'm sitting here listening to you talk about this album, and after I talked about it, I'm just like, oh yeah, it is a really good album. And I'm hearing like the vocal harmonies to Gypsy in my head. I'm like, oh, I think I'm gonna go listen to that again when we get done doing this, And but think about it too, a science fiction concept album in 1969. Right? I mean, this is like pretty heavy stuff for the time, I think.
Ahead of their time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So my number one is going to be In Search of the Lost Chord from a year prior, 1968. This is probably their big psychedelic album, and I kind of love it for it. I think they took a lot of chances on this album. It's a fairly immediate album, I think. Like, this is the one of the early ones you could put on and kind of really get into. It's kind of rocky in spots. It's a little avant-garde. It's got, the amazing Ride My Seesaw, which is killer. Legend of a Mind, you mentioned, is so good. Voices in the Sky, Dr. Livingston, I presume, has got that kind of quirky, like kind of real, like majestic nature of the band. The actor is fantastic. A lot of good stuff on here. Yeah, just dig it a lot. Legend of a Mind, terrific song. Terrific song. I just find, for me, this, of all the early albums, this is like the fun album for me anyway. It's psychedelic, it's fun, it's got great pop melodies, it's kind of proggy in spots, but you can't go wrong with any of these. I mean, we're talking about a really, really incredible catalog that, when I like I said, I don't visit the Moody Blues music too often, but I love that I have it in my collection. I have all these in my collection because when I do decide to go and visit this band or revisit this band, I really enjoy it. But it's not like I don't reach for the Moody Blues like I reach for Yes or King Crimson or Genesis or Jethro Tull or any of those type of bands. It's like, this is like, the Moody's for me is like, I have to be in a special kind of frame of mind. I'm in the mood for Moody's music because there's really nothing like it. Except for maybe Barclay James Harvest, right? But that's a story for another day.
Yeah, I agree, and I think being a reviewer of music, sometimes you kind of, I miss listening to music just for the pleasure of it, and you kind of it's not until I buy, maybe I'll go out and buy a used copy of some band or whatever, and it will kind of force me to, go back, or not force me to, but, I'll go back and listen to some other stuff. And, I have all these CDs in the collection and they're awesome. And it's just, I haven't pulled them out as much as I probably should have, just time, to listen to music. But it's nice having to, because we did this show, listening to this stuff, it really does deserve, it definitely has a place in the history of rock music. And I think they're a very important band, groundbreaking actually. And as you said, given, 1969 sci-fi concept album. I mean, that's pretty groundbreaking, really. So they're just a great band, and I really enjoyed rediscovering their music. And I hadn't listened to these albums in quite a long time, and it was
same here. This was a fun exercise, and I think it was good that we took a little extra time to do this, because it allowed us, both of us, on our own, to kind of go and rediscover these again and find all the great stuff that's included on them. So it was really cool. And I think I've never seen the Moody's live, but I saw John Lodge's band about a year ago, and I quite enjoyed that. And that's what kind of got me started to thinking that the time is going to come really soon where I'm going to kind of dive back into the Moody's music again, because I do it every couple of years. I don't, again, not an everyday listen for me, this band, but I've been, periodically loving their music for a long, long time. So this was a lot of fun. So,
cool. Awesome, Pete. I really enjoyed it.
Good. Same here. So hopefully everybody enjoys this at home, and you know the drill, everybody watching. So we picked our 10 favorite Moody Blues albums and we ranked them, but you can feel free to do the entire catalog you want, or give us your top 5, top 10, top 15, whatever you want to do. And be curious to see what the comments are showing, and see how you guys rank these albums, because there's a lot of classic ones here. So I want to thank John for coming on the show today. We'll be seeing John again in the near future. Visit both of us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. John's got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of reviews on the website alongside myself. I think John and I are the most prolific reviewers on seatranquility.org. And so go there and check out all the latest reviews and stuff. Visit us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. And of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. So we'll see you guys tomorrow. We got Martin Popoff back on the show tomorrow morning for a deep cut dive into the discography of the Scorpions. So you don't want to miss that. So for John Neudorf, I am Pete Pardo. We'll see you guys real soon. Take care.
See you later. Thanks, Pete.